What's going on, everyone? Don and Nelly here once again. Gonna, carry on from last episode. And, you, last episode I talked about a bunch of various, my history with the genre and all that. So today I figure it'll be kind of fun to go through a bunch of various different subgenres and do a bunch of videos for each of those and talk about some of my favorites, some of my least favorites. Not necessarily like a in-depth sort of a thing, but basically like just overviews of like my various thoughts and feelings on the various subgenres and scenes and stuff like that. So that means for today we're going to be looking at slasher films. So I figure that'll be a fun one to get out of the way first. Not that I don't really dislike slashers. I'm actually a huge slasher fan. Not that I would say that they're my favorite, but basically, if it's done right, I really end up liking it. So I figure I'll go through, run down a little bit of things, and do like a bunch of little thoughts on the subject. First of all, for me, I basically look at slashers as like a three-pronged thing. So I look at slashers as having two or more victims. So I'm not, a slasher film, I need a body count. So there's a few that are kind of, on like the lighter side that I still think they're good, but there are definitely some that, you could beef up, so to speak. So I like having a body count, like a bunch of murders or something like that happening. So, I like to say that, like at least two, because, you need like somebody to die, otherwise they're not slashers, they're, another genre altogether. So I look at slashers as, having at least two deaths. I need a priority or complete and total adherence to objects either impaled, slashed, or sliced at a human body to kill them. That's actually slashing. It determines the act of how they're going about doing it. So, a slasher film that doesn't necessarily, stab knives into people or, grab like a piece of the object, like in the environment around them and, crash their, stab them, impale them, crush their skulls, something. Not that I don't like having, characters just, shoot guns at people, but it's a cheat, You can stand away at a distance and, like 10, 20, 15 feet away and, just shoot somebody at will and, bam, you've got a body count. Like, no, I like the close quarter stuff. Like you get up close and personal, you you dish out the violence in like a close quarters manner. And I kind of like the idea of, like various tools, like garden sheds and knives and, take like a giant, like oversized pair of scissors and stab somebody's eyes out or, stuff like that where, like it's not just, some random guy sitting there with a gun shooting people. Like it can be horror in a sense, and I don't mind if a character busts out a gun and uses it, but I prefer a predominance or just like a complete and total lack of it around. So I usually prefer something like that in my films. I can handle it if they're not, but I basically go for just simply, stabbing, slicing, impaling, crushing, physical hands-on kind of deaths. And the last thing that I like is that I like it to be human or humanoid. So not necessarily something that would, I can look at and say human, like, okay, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, like they're obviously human, or somebody like, Victor Crowley, who, okay, maybe it's a stretch, but there's still enough of a human figure there that you could reasonably call it a human, even if they're like deformed or mutated or something like that. But I say humanoid because I I've seen enough films that I call slashers that aren't human. For example, I think the Final Destination films are slashers, even though they're not necessarily human beings. It's a personification of a mythical entity. Like, if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, I guess, but, it's literally death, the figure of death coming to kill people one by one. So, to me, that's, a humanoid figure, or even though it's still a creature feature, I can make a very, very reasonable case that Pumpkinhead is a creature feature that has a lot of slasher in it. A lot of Predator is based off of it being a slasher film, and that's a debate for another time. I'll get into that later. But it still needs to be reasonable enough for me to consider it humanoid or human to be considered a slasher. So, okay, Freddy Krueger, he's still technically human, but I consider him enough of us, consider it close enough that it's still a slasher to me. So, I look for those aspects in a film in order for it to be a slasher. I'm not really concerned about, the setting, if it's out in the forest, if it's out at a summer camp, if it's, a remote house, or like an apartment complex or something like that. Like it can be anywhere. Takes place over the course of several days, takes place in the course of one night. It can vary. I'm not necessarily a stickler for stuff like that. As long as it really hits like those main three aspects, the body count, the predominant usage of tools, or, complete adherence to tools, using tools essentially, and like a human or humanoid being. Like that's basically all that I look for. So I'm just gonna like run down like just a couple of like my big thoughts on the several of the big films. So I'm a huge Friday the 13th fan. Probably one of my favorite franchises. I'll definitely go into those a lot more at a later date, but essentially I'm a huge fan. I do like 1 and 2. I would say 1, 2, and 4 are my favorites. Not that I don't dislike 3, but I have a few issues with that, like I said, I'll get into that at a later time. 5, I don't like at all. I'm not a fan. The 6 is good. Again, it's not necessarily one of my favorites, but I have fun with it, and it's a good time. 7, I think, is one of the more underrated entries. It's not, again, one of my favorites, but I really think that one's like a real grounded, back-to-basic slasher that I really enjoy. I have a lot of fun with it. It's something that God, I want to see that unrated cut so bad. It's, again, something that I really want to go into depth more when I do like a franchise retro. 8... again, I'll save that for later. Jason Goes to Hell. I really like that one, but again, that's something that I really want to go into depth a lot more with at a later time. Jason X, again, another really fun, cheesy entry. It's probably, I would say, up there with like the first 4, even though I don't really like 3 that much. I think Jason X up there with 4. The first 4 are like one of the better pure slashers in the series. Again, something I will come back to at a later time. I don't mind the remake. It's, it's good for what it is. I like it a lot, but I have some issues with it. Again, save that for a later time. The Halloween series, I really should have thought this through, because I really want to save a lot of my thoughts for that later. I'll just say this about this series. As a slasher film, basically, like I said, following those 3 aspects that I mentioned earlier on, I like Part 6 the most as a slasher film. I like it more than Part 1. I'll just leave it at that for now until I come back to the films at a later date. Nightmare, oh man, I'm not a huge fan of these. I like the first 3. That shouldn't be no surprise to a lot of people. They think the first 3 are the best. it's hard for me to again talk about a lot of these without going into in depth on them on a franchise retro. I'll just say this: I'm not a fan at all. Even though I like the first three, I'm not super high on them. I'm not like super gaga over them. I don't think any of them are like hallowed, untouchable classics in the genre. They're fun, but that's about really all that I have to say about them. After that, I think the series is just mostly crap. I actually like the remake. Let's just leave it at that. I actually like the remake more than a lot of the entries in the franchise. So again, I'll save that for a later date. Leatherface again. I save it for a later date. I'm a huge fan of these. I was actually kind of surprised until I went back in and rediscovered them, but I was actually really surprised that I liked them as much as I do. Not necessarily the highest body counts, but a lot of fun, and I think the series is really underrated. I'm a huge fan, so I'm definitely intrigued to go back in and give those another look later on when I talk about those again in depth. But some of my other underrated ones, I really like the Sleepaway Camp series. The first three especially, I think those are really kind of underrated. I really like Madman as well. It's another one of those underrated slashers that doesn't really get a lot of love. Um, let's see, The Prowler, My Bloody Valentine. I'm a huge fan of those, especially My Bloody Valentine. That one's really up there for me. Probably, I would say, if I was to rank like, at least in the sense of like a non-franchise, like a franchise list. So I'm not including like all the Fridays and all the Halloweens and all the other Texas Chainsaws and all of that together. My Bloody Valentine is definitely up there for me. I really like that one. Great backstory, a lot of great stalking scenes, some cool deaths, a great setup with the killer's identity switch. I really enjoy My Bloody Valentine. That one's a lot of fun. Some of the other ones I do want to touch on real quick. I really like a couple of the Scream films. Again, I want to kind of keep it a little light just so that way I can have a little bit more for later on when I do a franchise retro, because it's kind of hard to discuss them without doing franchise retros. Just because slashers are just so easy to franchise. So, but yeah, the first Scream is okay. I'm not high on it at all. But for me, 2 and 4 are the high watermarks in the series for me. Those are the big ones, and I'll get into those a little bit later. I really like those two, part 2 and part 4. Those are definitely way up there for me. I'm a huge fan. 3, yeah, I'll save that for later. Not a huge fan. Um, in terms of being a slasher, I like I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. I don't think it's a good film. I don't think it's necessarily, well, it's not a good film. I'll just leave it at that. But the areas I like in it are its slasher scenes. I think those are those are easily the best parts of the film. So I'll just leave it at that for now. I really don't care for the first one, and let's just not even bother with the third. um, but basically, I just wanted to like run down just like a few of these, just to like give it like a small little sense of where I stand with these. So I can't really think of other like really bad slashers unless I just go like a lot of the late 80s like shot on video stuff, which even though they're not necessarily like the best in terms of like technical quality, the fact that they really delve into like those slasher characteristics that I mentioned, and they do the best they can with what they have. I don't mind them, even though you can easily look at them and say they're not good films. There's still something that I can look at and say, okay, they're really good for what they are, but what they are is just like C and D level tier kind of content. So is that really a good thing? Like they're great. They're really great C and D level films, but is a C and D level film really good? So it's kind of like one of those like small little debates that we can have, like in the community as to whether it it's really good at what it does, but what it is that it's not very good. So it's a really good, not very good film, if that makes sense. So a lot of like I said, a lot of these would be like the low budgets, like shot on video stuff, like Evil Laugh or Blood Lake or Nightmare Vacation or like the stuff like that, or like a dozen of the other I could name dozens of these kinds of films, but that would just it would take too long. It wouldn't really be that interesting, and we're running kind of long as it is on this video already. So let's just leave it at that for now. Like I said, probably I'll go into depth a lot more on these when I do like big franchise retros. So stay tuned for that. They're definitely going to be covered at some point. So follow along for that when I get to them. But yeah, let's call it here for now. It's basically my general thoughts on slashers. Um, so like I said, if you want to follow along, you can. I'll link my website down below. You know, donshorrorworld.blogspot.com. You can find all my writing on there. Tons of slasher reviews, tons of other horror reviews. So yeah, take care and talk to you guys next time.